Let's call the meeting to order. This is Bella Vista City Council Work Session, August 21, 2023. First couple items. I'm not sure what's causing that. First couple items are a review of minutes from July 12th, the special meeting, and the review of minutes from the regular meeting. I don't know if people had a chance to read those over or anything they want to discuss. Okay. Now the next couple items under old business are item A is amending the zoning ordinance about county parcel number 16-40236-000. And item B is related. It's about county parcel number 16-79388-000. And, we can do what we think is best. Our attorney has suggested that we table both those and use item C, because it combines the two items, and they're closely related.
The reasoning on that is there are two different rezoning petitions that involve two different parcels, but your zoning decision, at least some of the discussion, whether or not you end up doing this or not, you're going to rezone a central area which impacted both petitions and both parcels. And so really it was going to be very complicated to try to amend these two that you already had on the agenda, because we'd have to amend each one to have two different zones, and then we'd have to have legal descriptions for that. But if we combine and do item C, then we can take care of that problem and accomplish the same thing. So that's our suggestion, because of the legal descriptions we had we had a legal description for the entire area, and then a legal description for that area which had been discussion about making a P1. It's very irregularly shaped, kind of down in the middle area of that whole area, and that's what this new one accomplishes. So it also switches it to C2. I only put that in there because I thought there was some discussion about going to C2 at the last meeting, but that's amendable if that's not what you want. So it is your decision.
A question for clarification, if I may. The zoning for the Sugar Creek Shopping Mall area, is that C1 or C2? The west side of the creek for the Sugar Creek Shopping Center. That's
where Allen's and the Goodwill shop and all behind the Sonic?
Yeah. C4. Okay. So the area on the west side of the creek you were proposing is C2, Counselor? Is that what it shows? Or?
I'm not proposing anything.
Well, I know, in your draft. In your draft.
Yeah, he wrote it as C2.
Both of those pieces, the east side and the west side of the creek.
I would direct you to, there's a map that shows it.
There's an area west, and it does include the portion to the west of the creek, or the floodway. That would also be C2 if you approved what's proposed on here.
Okay, all right.
So there's a chunk of C2 to the northwest of the floodway, then there's the floodway that we're proposing to be P1, and then the east of the floodway would be C2 as well, as shown.
If you'll look at page 33 of the agenda packet, and then at page 34 of the agenda packet. Page 33 is the broader area, and again, this encompasses parts of two different parcels, which are already somewhat split with an area in between. And so the Exhibit A, the whole area, what we say there is it would be all Zone C2, less and except that which is in Exhibit B, which is the next page. And then when you look at that, page 34 of 181, that middle area has been redrawn and described, and then all of that would be the P1 area.
Okay.
While we're discussing it, I would mention that Cooper Communities has requested going to third and final on this since they saw there was no opposition at Planning Commission or City Council so far. So,
Question.
go ahead, Larry.
Do we need to vacate items A and B on old business then?
Yes, so what you would do, my suggestion, if you want to go ahead and consider all this as part of item C, then at the regular meeting next week, there needs to be a motion to table indefinitely item A and a motion to table indefinitely item B. And I
Then
guess
move on
if
to
those
new business.
motions fail, then we won't need to do C as well. So we'll have more maneuvering to do. I don't think that would happen. But yes, we'll need to do away with A and D in order to do it through C.
Okay, thank you.
Any more discussion on that, or is that to go? Okay, ordinance D is amending various sections of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Bella Vista to require residential tree plantings and natural vegetation preservation for all developments and for other purposes. And there's quite a bit attached to that. I think Taylor's going to say, give us a little bit of background on this.
Okay, there is quite a few areas of code, the Development Code, Chapter 109 and Chapter 107, that are being proposed for amendment with this project. This comes to us or with support, I should say, with the Tree Advisory Board. Councilman Honchel has been working with staff on this one. It's been going on for a little bit, but essentially we're one of the few cities that still don't have like a tree planting requirement. Or some type of mitigation or replacement or preservation requirement. Currently, you can clean sweep the entire lot, all third of an acre, all a quarter, all 0.28, whichever it be. There's nothing that's stopping anyone from doing that. However, we do understand that septic system lots need that. So the preservation discussion tonight only applies to sewer lots. However, the tree planting requirement would apply to both sewer and septic lots. So essentially, just a summary of what's here. Staff, along with all the various other participants in this effort, is proposing that single-family developments and duplexes must plant 2 shade trees. And we have recommendations in our list already, which we call out to 109, 221. We already have tree size, 2.5 caliber. And we have placement requirements such as shall not interfere with utilities, drainage, things like that. So we already have the requirements set in place for something like this. We just don't have the applicability. Right now, single family is completely exempt from any requirements like this, so we are proposing to make them at least subject to only a couple things. So that way we can keep some trees and put some trees back where we can't keep trees. So there's multiple items at play here. The preservation, again, only sewer lots. We have a 35% max coverage area for the R1, and so staff kind of proposed 25% a lot, native vegetation, native tree canopy to be preserved or untouched or maintained, so that we can also not only replace trees but preserve our native canopy, because you want to save the mature trees while you're doing this. That's really the big item, is preserving the mature trees that are already established. Because we all know that sometimes it's really hard to keep little trees alive. So focusing on that, but again, we recognize septic lots. It's really hard to do that, so only going for sewer lots here. And there's also an administrative variance, if you've noticed. So if there's something where they can't reach the 25%, staff can administratively vary it to 20% or 5% less. And also, there's a really important note in there. I know Planning Commission wanted me to point that out. An applicant shall not be required to plant trees in order to reach this minimum percentage of preservation. So if you buy a clean sweep lot, I know there's some on the west that are like prairie-like, you don't need to plant trees to get 25% of your lot if it's sewer. If it was already, you bought it like that, it was pre-development, it won't apply to that. So not trying to put any undue hardship on any of the builders or applicants, just trying to preserve what makes Bella Vista beautiful. And again, our comp plan also calls out for this. Although they do want 1 street tree and 1 yard tree. However, in Bella Vista, again, we're unique. The right-of-way here is not where it should be. It's hard to delineate where the right-of-way is and where the front yard actually begins. And so a little bit more simple simpler approach, just 2 shade trees in the front yard. Still reaching the same end goal as the comp plan, just a little bit different wording. And it also talks about preserving and protecting the native part of Bella Vista, the natural part of Bella Vista, because again, that's what Bella Vista is, a beautiful view. Everyone moves here, I don't know how many comments I see for the trees. And so right now, we have nothing protecting those trees. And so a lot of words, a lot of background. I'm happy to take any questions on this. Yes.
I have a couple questions. So this 25% preservation, so usually are we talking trees? Because usually you have trees and you have some brush and whatnot. Are we talking just the trees? So that means if there's 8 trees, you have to preserve 2 of them?
When I envisioned this, proposing this, it was a very simplistic approach, just like we do with max coverage. I was just imagining 25% of the lot. Just like we calculate coverage, you can only have that amount of the GFA on the lot, same thing with that. We didn't want people going out and counting trees and identifying trees to tell us how much is currently on there for single family development, because again, that's a hardship. That's a lot for R1. We're not trying to inhibit development. So it would be essentially how we do with our zoning max coverage, 25% of this lot whenever we're reviewing the BMPs and the lot clearing permit. They have to show us the limit of disturbance, so we would just make sure that the limit of disturbance does not include 25% of the lot.
So
is how I envisioned it.
Would you preserve underbrush too, or just the trees in that 25? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Usually there's, maybe brushes,
Yeah,
a foot
typically.
high and some trees.
Yeah, the
What
tree
would we
canopy is
preserve?
where it's going, is the
Oh,
is the
okay.
intent.
Yeah. My second question is, I guess I envision a situation where right in the middle of the lot, there's a bunch of trees,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not some anywhere else, and, you got to remove them to build the house, right? So, what happens then?
Yeah.
Is that an administrative variance, or?
Yeah, if that's only the literal 25% around the front and not the rear, because like all the development here is in the front. There are some instances where the lot is massive and they probably wouldn't have an issue anyway reaching 25% when they're 1 acre or more, but in that case, administrative variance, or if there's not any trees in the back, it sounds like, they wouldn't have to plant any more anyway. But if it's sewer, they have to plant the 2 trees in the front anyway, but I don't know if I answered your question. I don't think I did.
As well as you could. I just was trying to envision every situation, and one thing you notice about the building, you say, gee, I hate to see all those trees knocked down, but sometimes the trees are just right where the house has to go, it's just.
Well, keep in mind that it's a planting requirement, so they could be required to replant an area to meet that. But they also would get it, correct me if I'm wrong, but they get credit toward trees that are left. So
Sure.
if they're able to leave trees, they get, at canopy, they get
So if
credit.
they're able to leave them, they don't have to plant any, basically.
Well, if it meets the
Yeah.
number.
Both of them have a preservation. If you're able to save 2 trees, you won't have to plant 2 trees in the front yard. That's in the 109. But the 107 that only applies to sewer, you shall not be required to plant more if there's not any more on there. And then 5%. But I will note, if that is something that we're concerned about, we can increase, if the city council's in favor of that, the administrative variance if that is a concern. Although I will say that most of the lots that we see through the GDCs are completely wooded, so I don't think that would be as much of an issue, but we can increase the administrative variance, because normally most of this land alteration, staff does have a certain amount of authority throughout, like grade, cut, fill, things like that. So if 5% is not enough to suffice the concern with that review requirement, or we don't want those kind of things going to planning commission, then we can adjust those to a greater percentage for the admin. Open to discussion for that too.
Jerry?
Don't we already have requirements about replanting trees on lots that have been cleared?
It shall be restored, again, it's a very open requirement. It says the land shall be restored to as closely as possible to the pre-development stage. It doesn't say tree plantings or anything like that, it just says vegetation.
So, but that's not being enforced, or we don't enforce that, right?
We are enforcing it, but the interpretation or historical interpretation of what vegetation is here is ground cover. And so staff is noticing that that's not sufficient enough because trees are not being replanted, basically, just ground cover.
I just happened to flip to an area or a part here that says that lot and area requirement says at least 70% of the parcel area shall be left undeveloped as green space.
So 70%, are you perhaps maybe looking at the zoning requirements for conservation? P1 conservation zoning requirements?
It's recreational open space district, wetlands, et cetera. But then it goes on to say that 70% of the parcel shall be left undeveloped as green space.
Yes, that is our P1 zoning requirement for green space. So any other development other than residential has a green space requirement. Again, it doesn't speak to trees. It just says you can't cover 70% of this lot with a structure or parking or, concrete, asphalt, gravel, things like that. So it's just, again, talking about ground cover.
That's in a P1 district, conservation district, right?
Correct, that's the zoning bulk and area requirement. We also have industrial has a 15% green space and 20%, and commercial has 25, 20, 15, and 10 through C1 through C4. Our residential zones do not have any green space requirements right now.
So the new numbers proposed here. The new numbers proposed in section 3, the percentages are down from what you have just recited.
These are a little bit different. So this is preservation.
So it's different than what we're talking about here.
It's different than the piece of zoning that he has, the P1 zoning bulk and area requirement.
Okay, so.
They do speak to each other.
What Councilman Snow is talking about is a zoning district P1 versus a residential or commercial development lot that we're dealing with in this revision.
So this revision is only speaking to a preservation requirement of tree canopy.
For developable lots.
Yes. The item that he's bringing up is just a bulk and area requirement that we have to check through. Just like we do with max coverage, only 35% of the lot may have a structure on it. On top of that, you may have a 60% green space requirement. That means you can't. Typically, that's a 60%, that's huge. I shouldn't use that because we don't have any that big besides conservation, that's 70%. But like C1, okay, I'll just use C1 as an example. So currently our bulk and areas requirement, 60% of the lot maximum can be covered with a building. And then you have a 15 or 25% requirement shall be left as green space. So that's 85% of the lot already taken out, basically. You can't put a structure, I'm trying to break this down as easy as I can, sorry. 25% of the lot is green space, which is what you're reading. Structure or non-pervious areas can be put there, cannot be put there. You have to have 25% of the lot that's dedicated to green space, like coverage, vegetation, things like that. We already have that. That's just green space. Again, that's not talking about tree planting or how many trees or anything like that, which we do have for non-residential development. But the table that you guys have before you tonight in the section 3 is preservation for sewer lots. But it does coincide with the zoning green space requirement that you've seen in our code. It's actually less restrictive than some of the zoning.
What kind of structures would be allowed in a P1 district?
It depends on the use.
May I add something real quick, Taylor?
Yes.
The only thing that's being changed, if you look in the margins on the right side, the only thing that's being proposed that's going to be amended or added is in the margins on the right. Prior to this, we've had, as a community, have had preservation in place on the commercial side of things, correct?
Not preservation.
Not preservation,
just
but
green space. Like you have to have grass here.
right, but
Yes.
my point is that if somebody's just taken a first glance at this, thinking that this whole thing is new.
So like right now, you can clear a whole lot and then put back, 15% as ground cover and meet your green space requirement for certain lots. But this would say, no, you have to preserve some of the native canopy. This addition would, regardless of your ground cover, which this will help meet your ground cover, your green space requirement.
But my point is the only thing that's changing or the only thing that's being added is what's pointed out in the margins. We're adding to an existing ordinance that's in place.
Do you have notes in your margins? I don't have any in mine.
It should be in your staff
I don't
exhibits.
have the,
It's in the PDF file.
yeah, it's in the PDF.
So the material that was in front of the planning commission, I rewrote and formatted into an ordinance form.
Here.
But the changes are, there are the little red marks.
In the planning commission.
That are relate to what we have on books now.
Go ahead, Wendy.
Just purely for my education, last year I talked to a couple of different department heads about clear cutting of lots and what we could prevent it. It was mentioned a few times that because when we start clearing off some of the trees, it changes the drainage, and then the remaining trees either get flooded or they get drought, and so then they end up falling over or dying and causing issues. Is that incorrect, or is that no longer a concern, or?
So the stormwater comment's pretty interesting, because when you remove trees, it makes stormwater worse. Like, it raises the level of groundwater. Whenever you take out root systems, you take out things that drink it, eat it, things like that. You have no more stability in the land, and that's an erosion and land stability requirement. But yeah, the water level will raise if you remove the trees. But if you keep some native trees and you keep some native root systems in the ground, that helps mitigate stormwater. So really the number one complaint we get with that is normally, someone just cleared the lot next door and now I have all this rainwater that wasn't here yesterday. It increases it. But there is another complaint that I've heard from the builder side, is it's hard to preserve. It's hard to keep a tree alive during development. It's hard, things like that. However, we have a lot of old areas of the city of Bella Vista that have very old, mature oaks, so they were able to do that. I know we have other cities, again, we're the only city that doesn't have some kind of mitigation, preservation, tree landscaping requirement for single family development. So it is able to be done, in my, just my opinion. But.
Just real quick, I welcome, bringing the ordinance forward, I really do. I think current residents are actually going to welcome an ordinance like this. I've heard a lot of comments, in my 6.5 years now, of residents being upset about clear cutting of lots, and also, of course, Carroll Electric and cutting out the lines and all of that type of thing. There is a lot of detail in here, that you have to sift through and understand, so I'm still trying to digest that, if you will. I don't know how complicated it's going to be, but I think it's a worthy conversation. I do, and again, I think a lot of the current residents are going to be happy with it. And I would assume, that new residents that are moving in here and buying new homes, I don't know that they would really have an issue with it. I have 2 big, beautiful trees in front of my house, and the only reason they're there is because when the house was built, they weren't taken out. And I really enjoy them. They provide a lot of shade. Matter of fact, they're so big. I've got a tree service coming over and having to trim some of the lower branches because they've gotten so big. But anyway, I appreciate bringing it forward and having this conversation. So.
I got a couple of questions, I guess.
Go ahead, Larry.
I'm supportive of what's being proposed here. I think it's something that we need. And I've received calls from neighbors of a lot that's clear cut and said, how do we prevent this from happening? We're clearing out trees, we should be preserving them. And so I think it'll address some of those concerns that I've heard. In section 1, my question on this document we have here, what is new in terms of the exemptions? Is anything in the exemptions part of section 1 new?
Yes, part 2, because of section 109.214 being completely rewritten, the old 109.214 had to go somewhere. So that was added on to, because normally in our other areas of code, it is under applicability, the exemption normally is included with it. And so exemption used to have its own little home at 109.214. And so we took exemptions, added it with applicability, and then gave the residential tree planting its own home in 109.214. So part 2 is new, but it's just copy and pasted from the old code, and then of course adapted to reflect single family now has new requirements.
If you would put in plain English what really we're exempting, as an example, in a single family, in residential, it says single family residential and duplex residential are exempt from these regulations with the exception of the requirements noted in section 109.214. And that's section 2 and following.
Yes, so really as it reads, honestly, just additions that are less than 10% of the GFA are exempt for single-family development and duplexes. If that's what you're specifically, or previously approval, of course, if it's approved before this goes live, those would be exempt too.
So does the table then in section 3 apply here to these guys?
Section 3 is a whole different area of code. Section 3 is
Okay.
land alteration and preservation. Section
Okay.
2 is our zoning code, tree planting requirement.
Okay, those are the tree planting required. So again, what really gets exempted on a single family or duplex?
For tree planting or preservation?
Well, the exemptions from this section of the code.
So that's tree planting. So additions to single-family homes shall not be required to plant 2 trees if they're under 10%. And then a previous approval, again, if we've already approved the building permit, you know, a year ago when this thing goes live or whatnot, it's 6 months and 180 days whenever this goes live, those will be exempt from
If the
planting 2
building
trees.
permit has been issued, it would be.
Yeah,
exempt.
previous approval prior to this going live.
Okay.
And then additions. So if someone just wants to add a bedroom and it's 10% or less of their GFA, they don't need to plant 2 trees to get a permit from us.
One more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
How is this going to be enforced whenever a lot is proposed for building and you get the clearing permit?
Yeah, so thinking, you know, from administrative side, this would probably make most sense to go in our grading and erosion control review, because that's where we review where the trees are going to be cleared, things like that. And in other cities that have these requirements, they also review it through the grading permit.
So is someone going to go to the lot and mark the trees that you got to leave, or you just have to be trusted to the contractor? And what happens if, let's say that 70% of the is supposed to be left, or percentage is supposed to be left, and the contractor goes in, nobody conveys that to him, and he clears the lot? What happens then?
Well, I would hope the contractor who's responsible for pulling the permit abides by the permit requirements. So they would hopefully tell their clearing guy, don't, you know, flag it off, which I will see that probably being an item, is to flag off the preserved area on a sewer lot. That's pretty standard too. They'll go out there and flag it, or they'll mark it with spray paint, things like that. But that would fall on the contractor, because if it came through a permit and they proposed it to us and we approved it, then the contractor should make sure that his clearing sub doesn't do that or break the permit requirements.
I think, just to add to that, I think the real hammer in terms of enforcement would be denial of a certificate of occupancy.
That's also.
If they didn't build it by pursuant to the terms of the permit in the code, they'd be denied a certificate of occupancy, so they could not occupy the structure until they brought it into compliance. That would be the practical enforcement.
It's written in here, isn't it?
For tree planting, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But that would just also be, you can't get your final, just like right now to reach your final grade.
It's already in the code, but this
Yeah.
will be added to all that stuff that we've already got in there. It's not a specific special denial, it would fall under the,
Yeah, which it's a current practice right now. If a contractor were to make a 1-to-1 slope and we got out there at the final and the house is done, we would hold the C of O until they fixed the grade, got it to a 3-to-1 hopefully, or needed to put a retaining wall, whatever it is. That's a common practice already.
when houses get built, they have to have a certificate of occupancy before anyone can start living in them and using them. And in order to get that, they have to comply with all rules. This is one of those rules you would be adding. But there's nothing new about the concept of a certificate of occupancy in terms of what's going on now.
So what happens we're talking about section 2 now with the requirement for the C of O. And it says that both of those trees that we're talking about planting in the front yards, the certificate of occupancy may be held for those who fail to complete that landscape requirement. So if we're completing it in weather like we're having now, I suspect that the landscapers are going to be reticent wanting to plant trees in this kind of temperature situation. I don't know, but I'm assuming so. And so they're going to want a variance, they're going to want a waiver, so give me another 30 days or give me until November or something. How do we deal with that?
We do have a mechanism in code already for temporary certificate of occupancy for certain dates and times when it's not unfavorable to plant trees. I believe I know one of them ends on March 1st and one of them ends on December or something like that, but we do have timeframes that we can offer a temp CVO, or again, open to discussion. If that's not something the city council is favorable to, we can change that, but we already do have a temporary CVO for vegetation and landscaping requirements.
So that you have a mechanism to get around this?
Essentially, yeah, there's two technically in code for temp CVOs.
Section 2E. 2E deals with the septic field exception, and there you're saying you're exempted from the 2 trees in the front yard if your seepage bed is in the front yard. How about making them put the trees in the backyard then?
That we could add that. This was added on from the planning commission. This was a recommendation that came with them when they forwarded it to you guys. We could make that as a constraint of the exemption, or we could add that on here.
I would be inclined to have the same standard of performance, whether the septic system's in the front yard or the backyard, that they plant 2 trees. And so my thought would be is that put them in the backyard.
Yeah, you kind of have to watch that a little bit. My house, my septic lines are in the front of the house, so my house is pushed back as far as it can go, like the 20-foot setback or whatever it is. There is no room to plant any trees back there. I have POA property behind me, and it's loaded with forest. But as far as planting trees in my backyard, it wouldn't work.
If they preserve 2 mature trees back there in the building
Pardon me?
setback? Well, I'm just wondering if they could preserve 2 trees in that rear setback to get that mitigation
You just
credit.
have to come take a look at it and see. And I would
just
venture to guess that you would say no.
Well, that might be an answer to that, though, is mitigation, just like we have. We could apply that honestly, or interpret it that way.
Well, I think
Existing trees.
in the spirit of keeping with what we were going for was to try to keep, the neighborhood appeal,
Right.
street side or curbside appeal to the neighborhood. And as to what Doug's talking about, that's,
Isn't there going to be some setback? I suppose the worry is the roots from the trees that's penetrating the seepage bed area and plugging it up, which is really the concern for having trees close to your seepage bed.
well, I mean, I think, and I don't remember which commissioner suggested that, but she said that with her septic field being in the front yard, but that's what I thought. I initially, my initial reaction was, possibly put them in the back, but I just don't think that's keeping in the spirit of what we're trying to
Well,
accomplish.
the other comp plan goal too, that would be a little bit outside of that, but I think her intent when that recommendation was made to alter this was that she was talking about not putting any trees like around the septic system at all. That's why she made this recommendation.
So you're comfortable with leaving it out if your
I am.
bed's in the front?
And to Councilman Fowler's point, I mean, that's, if the septic field's typically in the front of the house, I think those lots, they typically have to push the house
Back
to
a ways.
accommodate, just kind of push the house around to accommodate that septic field. And those are not typical at all. I mean,
Those are pretty atypical, and I mean, they're normally lake lots too, because the septic system can't go in the back by the lot, like by the water, it's got a 100-foot setback, and so it'll normally go to the front, and then they normally have to have a specialized system to pump it
Yeah.
upwards, but
there are circumstances that prevent it. So, I mean, and that's, in my mind, whatever's in the backyard that's preventing it from going in the back. I don't think you'd be able to do much else with the backyard, so I don't know.
The other way I water my front yard is I just flush the toilet a whole bunch of times.
Water the trees, right? Then section 4, the last one, it's identifying the land area to be disturbed and preserved. I would like to see that expanded to say that the land areas to be disturbed and preserved shall be clearly identified, but they don't say identified where on the site plan, on the approved construction site plan, and staked in the field on the site.
So this section of code is pulled from the plan requirements. Like, there are a lot of grading plan requirements in it,
Okay.
and this is just one of them, and I just wanted to clean up the word a little bit.
Okay, so we have some place that it requires it to be shown on the plan that we
Yeah,
approve,
at the very beginning
and
it
out on the
says,
construction site to be protected out there.
oh, you're wanting it to be marked physically out on the site.
I would like it fenced off on the site if they're not going to be disturbing it.
Okay.
You won't keep the contractors off of it if you don't fence it. Or somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have to be an amendment.
So if that's not covered now, then we need to do it somewhere.
We can make that amendment. Because it's not in there right now.
It's not somewhere else, then we probably should have it
Not-
clearly identified on the construction site.
On the construction site, that is not in the code right now.
Let me just remind everybody of one thing. You all are, I think, getting ready to approve a contract with a company to totally rework all of our development and zoning regulations to do this very thing that you're talking about, and that is to
Okay.
fix these little things and make them read better and fit together with our master plan and all that. Let them do that. That's probably a 12 to 18-month project. Did we think 12-month project, 2-year project?
2 years, 22 months.
And because there's a lot of things that could be improved just along the lines of what you're talking about. And
Okay.
You better sit down before we take another 40 minutes talking about trees.
Well, I think,
she's got.
I've got item E in it.
Yeah, you might have to stay for a second. The next one is E, amending section 109-68 of chapter 109 of the Code of Ordinances to allow septic systems and other supporting features of a primary residence to cross rear setbacks upon certain conditions and for other purposes. So this is a small change, Taylor?
We are adding 2 words to an existing code, and those words are "and rear" after "side," because it's causing a lot of issues for our corner lots. And it's kind of making it unfair to get the same goal that adjacent interior lots can have, and that is to build across 2 property lines that they own. And with the fact that replats and lot combinations here are quite difficult, we wanted to clear that up and make it basically equal grounds for both corner lots and interior adjacent lots. So we're just adding "and rear," so basically the notice of structural encroachment letter can apply to both instances.
So I guess you would say that's a simple change, right? I mean, it's logical.
Very simple,
Yeah.
very logical, and will help out the builders quite a bit. Save
Yeah.
some headache for
So
sure.
this really deals with a situation where you have 2 lots, and you're going to use one of those lots primarily for the septic system field, probably, and the other one for the building and whatever. What about the ADH code, I think, says the drain field can't be closer than 10 feet from the property line. Would that still be something that would be complied with?
Yeah, we still have that code. That's chapter 109, 186, and we still require leach fields and tanks to be 10 feet unless they have a notice of structural encroachment, of course. But yeah, an adjacent lot that they do not own, 10 feet from the right of way, 10 feet from the rear. Yeah.
Okay. Do we need any deed restriction being recorded?
So the notice of structural encroachment letter is already something that's notarized and recorded. This would just make it applicable to this instance.
So what happens now, 5 years from now, I built a lot on build a house on 2 properties, applied to this code. Sewer comes along and I have to connect to sewer. What happens to that restriction on the deed?
That would be a legal question.
Do we have language in there that says it
It's
goes
still
away if
there,
you get sewer
but-
service?
It's still there, but the deed restriction language could say so long as the property is served by
And so-
septic and not sanitary sewer, or as long as it's clearly worded in that way.
So does the deed restriction that we require have a sunset if they connect up to sewer?
I'd have to look at
It's
it.
currently in the packet, right after my staff memo. That's what we currently use. That's our current mechanism.
That's right there. Page 93 of 181. So
Is that in the handout you're talking about?
it's in the packet, page 92 of 181 and 93 of 181. That's the form.
Talking about this.
Yes, so, do you want me to read it, or, I mean, it's there, I mean, it's all the wording is there, I don't know if it's, I'm not quite sure I know what your question is at this point.
Well,
What difference does it make once he's on the sewer. The septic's just gonna go away, you're not gonna use it anymore. So why does it even have to come off of anything?
Well, you don't want that, well, okay,
It doesn't make any difference.
probably.
He's currently gonna get on a sewer, the septic's just gonna sit there and that's it. We go on.
But it may affect the future use of that other property. If it's only used, and I'm thinking of the situation where you have a lot that you've developed with your building and all the rest of it. The other lot that you have is purely for the use of the septic system.
Okay, but if
Now,
you're
once
gonna
you
put your
connect the
septic
sewer-
on the first one, obviously you'll put your, or not your septic, but you're gonna hook onto the sewer on the first one. If it's that close, you're gonna put it on the next one.
Well,
Because you don't have a choice.
you may want to sell the next lot at that point, at some point in
Doesn't make any
time.
difference, Larry.
Well, and then the question is whether this restriction would prohibit that.
Would prohibit
Selling it?
The sale of that lot for a new house. With this restriction on it.
That would, I would have to defer to our building official, but I'm not sure if a septic system, ground, footing details, and all that.
I don't want to give a blanket answer for every potential future case. I can just, let me read it to you. It's right here. The owner of the parcels gives this notice of structural encroachment of property line, that a structure, including but not limited to, a building for human occupancy, accessory buildings, including but not limited to garages, shop buildings, swimming pools, and gazebos, driveways, accessory infrastructure such as septic systems and leach fields, or other improvements associated with the primary structure, that the structure encroaches across the property line lying between the parcels. That the owner represents that the structure is constructed across the property line with the knowledge of the city of Bella Vista and all persons or entities having reserved easements lying adjacent to the property line separating said parcels. That the owner represents that said easements lying adjacent to the property line separating said parcels have been released by the legal holder of any such easements. Said release has been recorded, and that the property line between the parcels has not been dissolved, and that for all legal purposes the structure is located on two separate parcels. That is, the property line between the parcels still exists. Any legal process which involves the parcels or the structure located thereon, i.e. mortgage, foreclosure, eviction, etc., may need to include the legal descriptions of both the individual parcels. Seeks that the property line between the parcels still exists. Any costs associated with the parcels, i.e. dues to Bella Vista POA, real estate taxes, assessments, etc., may be for both of the individual parcels. That as the property line between the individual parcels still exists, there may be other legal or practical issues which may arise. All current or future interest holders are hereby advised of such possibility. So it is an impingement. The reason we do this is because we allow people to build things across two lots. They own both lots, and we let them build it across the two lots. And so we want something to be in the record to let people know that part that goes with that house, or even the structure itself, is on a separate lot. And so this is how we developed to do that.
And so,
To answer your question, it would be a huge difficulty if someone tried to then build a separate house on that lot, because there's already infrastructure involving the house that's on either across the lot. I think it's an impossibility what you're talking about practically. I just don't see how. You're saying if it's the sewer that is the part that encroaches, and now the septic, and now the septic is not needed, that there needs to be a mechanism to release that, because now it's on sewer rather than septic.
yeah, if the second lot is purely used for the seepage bed, and you no longer need the seepage bed
So
if you
it would
connect
have
the
started, think
sewer.
about this, if it was you, for example, and you had filed this, you would have owned both lots. You apparently want to sell one of those lots because now you don't have infrastructure on it that you need anymore. So for you to provide a clear title to a potential buyer, you're going to have to release that interest, almost like an easement, or that notice, or certify it in some way. And the title company, we're getting in the weeds here, Larry.
So because this is issued solely by the owner can retract it?
It's a notice, yes, as long as there's not another party that's unilateral, I suppose they could.
So the owner could correct the situation that the restriction that this sets
I
up?
think there's a way for them to do that, yes, if it's all
Okay.
under
All
unified
right.
ownership.
Okay.
And now they need to make sure there's no longer to release that. I think there probably could be some sort of release file or something, but it's hard for me to answer this scenario because most cities would never allow things to be built across 2 lots. That's what we ought to be looking at. Why are we allowing that? Why don't we make these lots be combined? Because they're going to have to get that easement released anyway. And so, and then solve this issue. That's a bigger question that did come out of the Planning Commission. And it's something that I think we've dealt with, at least the POA. There are multi-parties involved. I think we can get beyond any POA burden regarding this, to say lot numbers and assessments. They seem to be, we've talked about that years past. They seem to be able to think that they're over that hurdle.
I'm not so sure.
It obviously involves Cooper communities as well, as they retain these easements. So they would have to retain any reserved easements in that area for there to be a lot combination. And maybe the city wants to require a formal lot combination in order to do this stuff. That way you don't have to have notice of structural encroachment. If the property sells, it all sells together. If it hooks to septic now, or hooks to sewer now versus septic, doesn't particularly matter.
Ideal for our new planning code review.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance F is waiving the requirements of formal competitive bidding and authorizing the contract with Superior Automotive for $37,285 for the purchase of one 2023 Dodge Charger police pursuit vehicle. And I believe that if you have any questions for the chief, I think he mentioned to me today that this is the last replacement that's in the budget for this year. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's replacing one vehicle for another. So.
Do we have an issue that the chief asked for a resolution and we're giving him an ordinance?
It has to be an ordinance if it's a bid waiver, so.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The memo is not legally operative, so
Okay.
it's okay.
All right.
Mayor, we do have that one, there's one more ordinance we handed out. There'd probably be a good place to handle it right here.
Right.
It's one of
Yeah,
our-
okay. Yeah, I have another ordinance, so I guess we can read letter for next week if need be. Anyway, this has to do with placement of the utilities being underground, and I believe this is in, Craig, in connection with the tree ordinance was the reasoning.
Yeah, it just seemed pretty logical. It just goes hand in hand. The way I came about that was, you know, if we're able to pass the tree ordinance as it reads currently, 2 trees per yard, and then if we have overhead power lines, we plant 2 trees, it grows for 5 years, and the power company comes and cuts it down. So I think this is an excellent opportunity to clean up the skyline, you know, throughout the city. And that's the whole thing, is that anything associated with the tree ordinance, the utility, this is not some revolutionary development patterns that we're trying to establish. This has been around for decades. So, you know, it's just a matter of cleaning up, or you know, I guess trying to get the neighborhoods just cleaned up aesthetically, and I think there's a benefit to having the power underground anyway. I mean, I've been a homeowner for over 30 years, never had a power outage until I moved here. So, and I have, you know, all the wires running in my house, you know, externally and all this other stuff. So, and I'm not saying that if the utilities are underground that you're never going to have a power outage, but I think it gives more reliable service, and I know that there's going to be comments about cost. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it all washes out one way or another. You know, I mean, that's no matter what, you're either putting it on lines, you're putting it underground. But anyway, really the thrust behind that was that if the tree ordinance, if we can get the tree ordinance the way as it reads, this just seemed pretty logical, so.
How did the planning commission react?
Everybody
Was it
seemed favorable to this.
unanimous?
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly was.
interesting.
And it's only for new stuff, I mean, you're not gonna go through residential and redo it. It's just
Yeah, there's nothing retroactive.
Which is the way to do it.
Right, and, you know, and that's what I'm saying, these are just small steps that we can just, a lot of the stuff that I'm proposing anyway, you know, we might not see the benefits of it for decades. I mean, as far as, you know, the trees, you know, taking off down the streets and all this other stuff, but I think that this is one of those things that we as council members or a community, you know, we can look back at and say, man, I'm glad we started doing that. You know, I think it's just better, aesthetically it's gonna be better, and I just think it's gonna be better for the community, so.
Would there be, I am not an engineer of any kind, would there be times or circumstances where they would not be able to bury a cable and they could get a variance or a waiver?
That's a Taylor question, and that's the only thing that, and I know that that's gonna come up. I know it will, but.
If they can prove hardship, that's
Yeah.
not a possibility.
They can seek a subdivision waiver requirement. If there's some kind of enlarged development, they cannot bury a line, just follow their subdivision development requirements.
This is purely for new structures. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify too, this is only for new development that is approved by the planning commission. So, you know, large preliminary plats and final plats, new subdivisions, not just one house going up down the street that was platted in the 60s. This does not apply to that. This only applies to development and subdivisions that require planning commission approval. And we already require it for non-residential development. It just, our code says it would be nice if residential would also do it, and we're just requiring it as a shall now. That's the only difference.
For example, if you have a building site now, a lot, it would not be affected. This would not affect it.
No, because that does not need planning commission approval. That's just normal.
It's a site plan approval, not a development approval. So it's clear to say at the last sentence here is the real key, single power pole near the exterior boundary of the development shall be allowed to provide the connections for underground service. So we're talking about developments here, not just existing site improvements or construction. In other words, if there's an existing site that's there,
Not single family, not one lot development. A plat
right,
that's
single lot
done,
development that's existing
that does not apply to it.
does not apply to this.
No.
So, we don't have, I don't think, too many of those anyway. We have lots of residential lots, but
Residential development that requires planning commission approval is a little rare. It's more of the commercial things, but as large lots start being subdivided, if this were to approved, then a new subdivision of like 4 or more lots would have to put in underground utilities.
underground utilities, right.
Jerry?
You may have answered the question, I couldn't exactly hear all of it. You just said something about 4 lots or something.
Yeah, so we have a minor subdivision area of code that it's a little different. But I'm saying like a major subdivision, which is more than 4 lots or more, requires preliminary plat and final plat approval, and that's where we review all the utilities that are getting installed and all of that, like you guys are gonna review later tonight. Instances like that would be required to put in underground utilities, but not just a single family home on an old pre-platted subdivision will not.
So if a builder, let's say one of our short cul-de-sac streets, there is no homes on it at the moment, that may not be such a thing exists anymore, but let's say a builder buys that, there's 10 lots on this cul-de-sac street that have not been developed. Would that be a new development?
Not if the plat's already platted.
Okay.
Now, if there's a chunk of land out there, and he divides it into 10 lots, or
Yes.
3 lots, or 4 lots,
Then he would have to
underground
put-
service would be required for that development.
Correct.
So who is going to have to pay for the utilities to go underground? Is that the developer or is that the power company?
The developer does all of the infrastructure improvements when they subdivide a subdivision. So they pay for the streets, the street signs, the utilities, they pay for all that.
Okay, thank you.
And as a side note, most of the communities around us require underground development, underground utilities for new development anyway.
That is a common practice, yes, in subdivision. It's a common practice, yes.
Okay, next one is G, expressing support for a citizen effort to authorize the levy of an additional 1/2 mil ad valorem property tax to support police pensions in the city. In order to put this on the ballot on November 7th, you just need to go out and get some signatures. I think it's 20 signatures. And you don't actually need city council approval, but I thought it'd be wise to bring city council in the loop and hopefully that they would approve it. What happened in 2014, we had a levy and it was 1 mil for fire pensions and 1/2 mil for police. And you're allowed to go up to 1 mil. And we, the police chief at that time chose to just do 1/2 mil. And of course, the police department's growing and people's compensation is growing. So I attached some paperwork showing where we're at economically. And this is, you know, I have last year's numbers. The cost was $507,000 and the 1/2 mil gives us around 310. So we have a significant shortfall and it's growing. And there's also, even with the 1 mil, the fire has a very significant shortfall. So I thought it was prudent to, and this would be a good year to go out and ask for that 1/2 mil to try and help with our finances. And all the money that comes from that is for police pensions. That's what it needs to be used for.
So has there been any kind of study, will the 1/2 mil cover the shortfall?
A 1/2 mil will bring in right now about $310,000.
So
So it's a little more than the current shortfall. Now, there's a big time lag because of the nature of property taxes in Arkansas. You know, they're collected at the end of the year. So if you tell the state this year, okay, this is our millage, say it passes, and you tell the state this is our millage, that applies to next year's taxes, which come up at the end of 2024 and are due in April of 2025. So there's almost a 2-year time lag. So this is planning into the future, really.
So is this, the fire's at the legal maximum of
Yes.
1 mil right now, so this
Yeah.
would put the police at the legal maximum as well?
Yes.
Something to,
So a 1 mil for the police would generate an excess, at least on the current numbers that we have here, of 113,000, based on what this is. But we're looking at a year and a half or 2 years down the road when we actually see the reality of that additional income. And so our costs are going to be higher than 507,000 a year and a half from now.
Yeah, even at December 31, they'll already be higher. That's from end of year last year.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing about timing on this because it came up. The draft petition that I've seen, which they may file, would have the election in November of this year. And you have to levy your taxes and certify that to the county before that. I'm pretty sure you have to do that before that. So it could be we may have about a year before we can, another year in there before we could levy at the end of next year to collect the next year.
So it's
Yeah.
like 2.5 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that for the meeting, didn't get a chance to, because I was thinking the deadline date might be before November 7. I couldn't recall when it
We
was.
can't levy with the intent, with
Yeah.
you know, any presupposition about.
You know,
an
every
election.
year we have to pass a thing, and you might recall one year Cave Springs forgot to do it. Was kind of famous locally. You have to pass a thing around in the fall and tell the state how much it is. So yeah, that would mean that the delay is 2 3/4 years, really, as opposed to 1 3/4 years.
Do you say the 1 mil is not sufficiently funding the fire department?
The amount I got on the fire, I believe the cost is $943,000, and the 1 mil gives you $620,000.
It's pretty good showing
Yeah.
here. So,
Yeah.
so what happens what is the funding mechanism then for that other shortfall then? If 1 mil is the maximum,
I think it comes out of our general fund. That's the problem. If you don't do as much as you can, you get to have a big, big bill coming out of your operating budget every year.
okay.
So,
It detracts from what we could give to the street department for street improvements.
or various different things, yeah. So I hate to, ask people to raise taxes, but this just seems so fiscally prudent. Actually, when Peter Christie left, he just said 2 things to me, and one of them was, you gotta pass that 1 mil police levy.
Well, too, so $500,000, it's, you're talking $19 a year. So you kind of got to put it in perspective too. It's not like it's a big hit.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is the taxes on that for the average house is, I said it was $19 a year. Actually, it's less than $19 a year. So it increases your property taxes, but it's not too painful. And for a lot of people, it's less than that. Obviously, it depends how your house is valued, so.
Saves a trip to McDonald's would have to be compromised to cover it.
So anyway, that's the story on that, and we can vote on that next week. The next one's a resolution amending the 2023 budget to redesignate $53,000 in capital budget from the West Side Salt and Sand Storage Project to the purchase of a dump truck for use by the street department. Karen, did you want to say a few words about that? I was thinking 53,000 was a good deal on a dump truck till I read the fine print.
Yes,
So,
the fine print is that we had our capital improvement budget. We came in under on our West Side Salt and Sand Storage Unit, but we also came in over on the purchase of our dump truck, so I wanted to just redesignate the money that was left over from the West Side Salt and Sand to cover that deficit we were gonna have on the dump truck purchase. It wouldn't touch any of the unassigned funds or just within our department transfer that money.
And it was capital expenditures that were already approved
Correct,
for this year.
correct.
Yeah.
So how much is a dump truck?
254 and some
Yeah, we
change.
had budgeted 208, but it came in at 254.
Is the price increase since?
Since
The
we had put
initial
in our
estimate was
initial
made, huh?
estimates,
Wow.
yes, yes.
25%.
Is that new or used?
We are
or-
expecting delivery at the end of this month.
No, I mean, is it a brand new
Yes.
truck? Yeah.
Yes. Kevin?
I said it's not an addition to the budget from last year, from this year. It's
No.
just a redesignation. It's moving money.
Just the redesignation, I'm not asking for any additional funding.
Yeah.
She's
that-
already budgeted in the capital budget this year for
Yeah.
most of that truck, which she thought was the whole amount,
Correct?
because
And
that was based on the prices she got from the vendors.
Yes,
so.
unfortunately, we came in under on the West Side Salt and Sand enough to cover that difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought the West Side Salt and Sand came out nicely. Looks nice.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
We didn't have an open house there, did we?
No, not yet, but our first winter storm will be there.
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next one's authorizing the mayor and city clerk to enter into a contract with Friesen Nichols in an amount not to exceed $235,500 for review of city plans and for drafting proposed revisions to city zoning and development ordinances and maps.
We have a presentation.
Great.
This is Dawn. She is from Vista Nichols. She will be the project manager if this is approved.
Welcome.
Thank you. Just a minute and get the show on the road.
And then the microphone.
Stay away from Yes. That might be it. Took a minute. Good. There you go. Okay. Super. I have a clicker here.
I'll just preface it real quick too. I know it's been discussed for months now. We talked a little bit about it last year, about how our development code, which is chapter 107 and 109, desperately needs looked at. It was put together quite quickly when we were made a city. Some pieces were copied and pasted, put together into one development code for us to use. And so as development has now, we're growing, we're becoming a bigger city. It's time that we get a code that's more specific to us and specific to our comprehensive plan, that speaks to our comprehensive plan, and makes the development process a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more smoother for staff and developers here, kind of paving a more easier way to develop. And so we started this process at the beginning of the year through an RFQ. We went through that whole process, and as you know, the government sometimes isn't the fastest. We have completed that process, and Friesen Nichols was the winner of the RFQ proposal, and she is here tonight with the contract and just a little bit more of an insight as to what they're offering to provide for Bella Vista.
So thank you for that introduction, Taylor. My name's Dawn Warwick. I'm with Friesen Nichols, and we're going to talk about exactly what Taylor prefaced right there. Just by way of introduction, as I mentioned, my name is Dawn, and I am an urban planner and project manager with Friesen Nichols. Friesen Nichols is a private engineering, architecture, and planning firm. We're based in Fort Worth, but I work out of the Tulsa office. We have an office here in Northwest Arkansas in Rogers, and so this project will be served by our regional offices. Myself, I've been a planner for a very long time. I have 2 degrees from the University of Arkansas. I started my career here in Northwest Arkansas, working for the city of Fayetteville for 10 years. After that, I went to Louisville, Kentucky, and worked for the Louisville Metro government for 7 years as their assistant director. And then I had the opportunity to come back to this region as the planning director for the city of Tulsa, which is what I finished my public sector career doing prior to joining Friesen Nichols about 4.5 years ago. So my experience is sort of on both sides of the planning table at this point. I've done development review, I've supported planning commissions, boards of adjustment, city councils throughout my career, and so I have a interesting, I guess, collection of experiences that kind of position me pretty well for this type of project. So I understand what Taylor goes through on a day-to-day basis in managing development and also trying to work on long-range planning activities, and then also now on the consultancy side. Sometimes cities don't have the resources to conduct some of these activities in-house. These are big projects. They only come around once every 5, 10, 20 years. So you don't staff up for something like that. We come in and basically augment your professional staff so that they can have a voice in the process but not have to carry the heavy load of it. So the folks that will be carrying the heavy load if we're selected include myself, Reese Wilson, Greg Simmons, and Jake Lange. These are the ones that you'll see most regularly working on this project. I mentioned myself. Reese is an urban planner as well. His experience and his expertise is in code writing. Before joining Friesen Nichols, he worked for a law firm, and that was what they did. They wrote development codes. So he has experience in different communities throughout the U.S. Jake is a relatively young planner. He just recently graduated with a master's degree from OU, has some great experience already, but is learning as we go. Greg actually is a Bella Vista resident. He works out of our Rogers office, and he is an engineer. His expertise is in stormwater primarily. He was previously the city engineer for Fort Worth, Texas, and has, past couple of years, moved up to this area and is working with our firm. So we will dip into his expertise as necessary, as well as the deep bench of other folks throughout the firm, and primarily the people within our urban planning and design group. Friesen Nichols has a fairly large urban planning and design team. That's basically a distribution of planners, landscape architects, and site civil engineers. We've worked on codes throughout the country, primarily the South, Southeast. As I mentioned, the firm's based in Texas. So a lot of Texas communities have Friesen Nichols codes and comp plans. But in addition to the four of us that will be really focused on this project and available to you on a regular basis, we have people behind us who are also supporting the project and have the expertise to do so. So just high level, we know you guys know this, but talking about planning, the difference between long-range planning and implementation or development regulations. The planning is what you all have done through your comprehensive plan. It's setting a vision for the future. It's establishing those long-range policies for development and growth over the next coming decades. It involved a lot of collaboration and discussion with the community about what they envision for the future. And it aids the development of those policies that need to be implemented and executed in order for them to become real and take shape. So Bella Vista adopted a comprehensive plan in 2020. That is our guide as a starting point. We'll utilize a lot of the components of that plan. The policy directives of your comprehensive plan feed into the code development. Your future land use map is fairly unique. This is not a future land use map where every property is identified as far as a different type of land use category that's desirable. So we're going to be crafting a code that is responsive to the development of these centers and destinations so that it reflects the flavor of development and the type of atmosphere that the citizens of Bella Vista really want to see as you continue to grow. So the development codes that we'll be talking about, as Taylor mentioned, Chapter 107 is your subdivision regulations, and Chapter 109 is your zoning code. Those are the primary pieces of your municipal code that we'll be working in. And the zoning, of course, identifies what you can do, where you can do it, what the setbacks are, basically the parameters of how you develop a site. And oftentimes it looks a lot like this when you talk about the different zoning districts. This is actually a page out of one of the codes that we've developed. And we like to incorporate a lot of graphics because people are much more attuned to reading graphics. You don't get as lost in all of the words. It's very easy to find what you need as far as the information is kind of right at your fingertips. So we try to integrate a lot of charts and graphics, illustrations, even photographs that explain the concepts within a plan similar to what you see here. You currently have this menu of zoning districts. As we look through and work to update your Chapter 109 zoning regulations, some of these may change. Some of the criteria for them may change. Some of the nomenclature could change. So oftentimes, if we do make modifications to the actual zoning districts, incorporated within your final document will be an equivalency table that tells you sort of this is what it was previously, this is what it is now, and these are the differences between the two. With regard to subdivision regulations, this is all about platting. It's how you create lots that can then be conveyed and developed. Oftentimes, this is where you are looking at hard infrastructure types of situations where the streets and alleys are located, where the easements and utilities go. So those will be the components of your subdivision regulations that we look at. Of course, you all are familiar with looking at plats. This is just an example of how we look at how we utilize the subdivision regulations to review plats. Talking about streamlining processes, I'm not sure that 12 steps is necessarily streamlined, but it actually looks like a pretty clean process when you can go to each one. So this is an example out of a code. I think this is from our Brownsville, Texas code. But making sure that people can really easily understand what steps they need to take in order to get through a development review process and get to an entitlement approval, that's really important. So we'll incorporate flowcharts like this, and typically each one of these steps, wherever there is a reference to another component of the code, we'll hyperlink that and provide cross-references. So if people are using the code in a digital format, they can jump between different components of the code without losing their place, and helps to make it more readable and more navigable. So again, these are just different types of approaches that may be integrated. So when we talk about subdivisions that would allow clustering or conservation, that really has to do with your subdivision regulations, street layouts, and how lots are configured, and what types of flexibility that you might have. When you talk about things like the pocket neighborhoods and traditional neighborhood design, that speaks more to the zoning components of your regulations, talking about the density, the intensity of uses, and in a traditional context, probably the intentional mixture of uses. So you have some centers that are identified in your future land use map that really call for the integration of mixed use. So we want to find the right ways to do that, things that the right combination, the right distribution of uses that fit for Bella Vista. So we did, as we put together our RFQ response and worked through the selection process, we started taking a look at your existing codes, and generally they need a fresh, a freshening up of codes. So general modernization, making sure that, like I mentioned, that they're easy to use. Codes are a lot of legalese. It's not fun. It's kind of like what you read to get put to sleep at night. They can look a little bit more engaging. They can be more approachable. And so we want to utilize all of the tools at our disposal to do that. The process components need to make sense. They need to help, have a sequence to them so people walk through the right steps and the code sort of tells that story. We also want to look at places like administrative actions. Are the right levels of approval established for different types of actions or requests? So you mentioned, or it was mentioned earlier this evening when there was a discussion about the tree preservation proposal. If that's something that's being considered, what are the right thresholds for administrative approval of variances? Are there other places within the codes that you could identify that make sense to be approved administratively? Oftentimes, those are the things that are regularly presented to the Board of Adjustment and approved. So if you have the same action going to the Board of Adjustment on a regular basis and they are always being approved or approved with the same conditions, could that be an administrative approval? So those are the types of things that we'll look at as we're working on the updates. So compatibility with other governing entities. Bella Vista is unique in that you have a city council, a property owners association, and an architectural control committee. That's not typical, but it is something that we are excited to learn about and to figure out the right ways to make sure that all of the players have a voice and that the approvals make sense with regard to sequencing and level of approval, etc. So the way that we'll get to this is we've established 4 phases for this project. The first is what we call a code diagnostic, and we'll spend time at the beginning of this project really understanding your guiding policies as well as your existing codes. We'll talk to stakeholders, we'll talk to you all as stakeholders, we'll talk to people in the development community and understand where their pain points are, where their questions are, what they've experienced. Sometimes those aren't the most pleasant conversations, but people tend to tell us sometimes what they won't tell staff, and so we want to hear really what people are concerned about. We'll also have a project website and a portal for people to provide just free-form comments. We'll also use the website as a means of launching surveys to get the community some level of education and engagement with this project. Code projects are not the funnest thing for the community to engage in because it's a technical document and not everybody is ever going to utilize a code necessarily. They may or may not ever have the need to go through a development review process. So we try to find ways to at least provide education and information for people who might be interested in seeing what's going on, but then also get feedback from those people who are willing to tell us what they think about things. So that all gets set up in the first code diagnostic phase of the project, and that code becomes sort of our roadmap for making changes to the actual regulations. So phase 2 is kind of the longest phase of the project. It's when we get into those regulations and start drafting amendments. We basically take them apart into modules and work on them pieces at a time so that we can kind of churn over pieces and have the staff reviewing elements of the code amendments as we are then, drafting the next piece. You guys will be involved in various components of this process. We'll definitely have a couple of points throughout the process where we bring updates to make sure that you're aware of where we are and what we're hearing, and have you kind of give us a gut check as to how things are going. The third phase of the project is making changes to your zoning map. So if we modify the zoning districts, likely we'll need to make some modifications to the zoning map so that they're working in tandem together as they should. And then finally, it will be the last phase is refining all of those documents and working through the adoption process. So all in all, this is anticipated to be an 18-month process. I think we started about 22, and staff said everybody's really anxious to get this done. Can we knock off some of that time? So we tried to shave off some time and think we can do this in 18 months. Everybody's going to need to work pretty quickly, though. This is a lot of stuff we'll need to flow through this process in order for 18 months to be reasonable. The way that we approach these projects, as I mentioned, with the various levels of staff and support that we have within our group, we try to build redundancy into our teams so that we're not stalled out if somebody is sick or needs to take a vacation. We keep the projects moving. Another way that we do that is by having frequent check-ins with staff. So Taylor's identified as your project manager on the staff side. She and I will be main points of contact throughout the project, making sure that we're regularly checking in with one another. We typically set up a 30-minute meeting every 2 weeks and keep the project moving. So if any issue arises, we're going to be able to address it very quickly. We focus on that diagnostic because that, as I mentioned, becomes that roadmap for making the adjustments to the codes themselves moving forward. One thing that we can do, and we often do within the diagnostic, is identify some opportunities for quick fixes. So there may be things that we don't need to wait 18 months or 22 months to actually implement as an improvement or change. So we'll try to identify those quick fix, or we've called them interim measures in the past. If there are things that make sense that we can go ahead and advance and bring through the approval process and get in place, then that's what we'll focus on, and those will be identified in the diagnostic. And the last thing that I think is important to emphasize is that you all have a professional staff, and they know these codes and they know the community, so we're going to utilize their expertise and utilize their knowledge in making sure that we are plugged in and that this isn't happening in a vacuum. Your staff will be very involved in every phase of this process. So this is just sort of a roles and responsibilities. We provide the technical expertise and bring the updates to you. City staff provides local expertise and knowledge. They know they have connections within the development community and can help make sure that we're thinking about the right things and that we're addressing the issues that you all have brought forward. Planning Commission, of course, has the power to recommend to you amendments to your regulating documents, and then you all, of course, have a touch point to the community, the ability to make sure that this is a long-term fix and that it's addressing the long-term vision of the community, and of course the adoption process. So next steps, this is what happens if you choose to engage us through this contract. We'll begin right off the bat, working through that code diagnostic. That'll take a few months. So we anticipate by the end of this year, we will be back in front of you presenting a diagnostic so that you have an idea of what issues we've identified, what we've heard from the community so far, and how that sort of represents itself into a series of recommended amendments to your code. Keeping in mind that the diagnostic is a flexible document, we're not going to identify every single thing at the beginning of this process, but we want to hit the big items and make sure that we have a focus and that we're really on point, so that as we move into the code drafting, hopefully those are just smaller items that pop up that we can address on the fly. So that is my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions if you have them.
I have a question. So the end game is that at the end of the whole process, you have one big code change, zoning change, plans in place, and hopefully we pass that.
Yes, that is the idea. So at the end of the process, you'll have a new Chapter 107, a new Chapter 109, and a new zoning map.
Yeah.
And as a package, that's what we'll present to you with all of the backup information and all of the red lines that you need to be able to understand what those changes mean.
I have a comment also. People always say, why are you hiring outside consultants? What do you need outside consultants for? And for one thing, our planners are smoking busy all the time.
Yep.
And I thought the background of your firm and the expertise is very impressive.
Thank you.
So, all of the redesign that you come up with, so does that mean that there are certain areas that are now zoned a certain zone, that after that those zones will change?
It's possible. We try very hard not to create nonconformities when we update codes, because we know that people have established property activities and uses. So our goal is to not have nonconformities established unless it's something that the community is wanting to phase out, and then that's something that you definitely can focus on that and find a way to allow them to continue to exist until such time as significant changes are proposed or that use is abandoned for whatever reason.
I think maybe the question would have been better phrased is, whenever this is all completed, what happens?
Whenever this is all completed, if you adopt an updated code, amendments to your existing regulations, they affect properties moving forward. So you may have properties that are not exactly in line with every criteria of the update, but they are perfectly fine to remain as is. They're considered legal non-conforming if they were established properly under your current codes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I welcome it. It's really way past due that Bella Vista takes a step forward like this. We all know, and this isn't being derogatory toward anyone, but we just have a cobbled together zoning ordinance, really. And it's just, kind of hodgepodge, and we just keep, doing a little thing here, a little thing there. We don't really know where it's right, wrong, indifferent, or whatever. And I know, you already stated up front, there are challenges here. You mentioned, the ACC, and of course, the POA. There's also a developer here. I know you're aware of that as well. But you kind of assume from today, from what we know in past history, that that'll stay whole into the future, but it might not as well. We don't know. Things could change. So let's don't wait until things maybe do change, and now we're left holding the bag, and we haven't done anything or taken any steps forward. And some of what you might want to do, or as far as recommending, might be kind of difficult, because again, we've got entities in play that might affect some of those changes that you like to put in play. But regardless, or nonetheless, I think that they need to be brought to bear. So yeah, I think it's time that we move forward. We're sitting now with over 30,000 people, and we're just going to continue to grow.
Right.
And, it's just time to act like we're a city. And, for too long, not too distant future, we're probably going to be 50,000 people, and we can't keep operating under the premise that we have, for several years now. So the contract, I do have a question on the contract. That's what, $235,000? Is that paid out in different steps, or is it all paid up front, or is it paid on the back end?
It'll be paid incrementally as we move through. We'll invoice monthly based on hourly. So that's a not to exceed amount. So what we'll do is as work is completed, we'll invoice the city monthly, and ideally we get to 18 months from now and we're right close to that number or under it, so that you all have little savings.
So we'll be putting the 235 in the entire amount in the budget for 2023, or are we going to parse that out?
I don't know if Kim's still here. I believe it's already in the budget for this year, and really it's probably going to need to be spread. So I think we're over budget for this year, is that right?
It may be.
We allocated $160,000 for this year, but we did not know the RFP process would take this long, so we probably will only be a year to spend what we budgeted. And we currently have 168. We probably won't spend that between now and December, but we did budget a large portion of this year already. That will need to be, bumped back to 20.
So maybe we get around.
Yeah, so when we do the budget for the next year, we'll, have to figure out what's going to be paid when.
Right, so it's not going to be 235.5 for the budget 2023. It's going to be a lesser amount than that.
Right,
So,
yeah.
okay.
We can work with staff and help get estimates so you all kind of know which falls into what budget year.
Okay.
But we do have money set aside this year for starting this process. It's just that it can't cover the whole bill. And you're not going to finish it all by the end of the year anyway. So
That would be a super hard thing to do.
Yeah, some of it
Overtime.
looks like some of it would fall into 2025 even,
Yeah.
under the 18-month schedule.
Mayor, I don't suppose any of this can come out of our free money.
You mean impact fee?
No, the what, 5 million that we got from the government?
Oh, well, it's not a separate fund, really, so.
We spent that money and we reimbursed salaries for prior years.
Yep.
We saved money from not having to spend it on that, so
Yeah.
it would not be a direct appropriation of those
Yeah.
grants, but potentially there's money in the bank because of it.
Have we ever decided what's going to do with that money?
Well, some of it's already been spent, and it's basically commingled.
we allocated all of that $5 million to replace our revenue for 2023, essentially, a lot of our income.
I think
Was it not?
It was 2022, wasn't it? It was,
We specifically
Yeah.
appropriated those grants to cover public safety salaries.
Right. Yeah, they went for a particular
And then,
purpose.
of course, we would have had to pay those salaries anyway. So that meant other monies that we had set in the bank.
Look, so we had a conversation about this just earlier today, and I've had conversations with Kim about it. So we have a significant amount of reserve funds, right? We also have a significant amount of capital outlays that we're looking at in the future. And if we would spend against every one of those capital outlays from the expenditure that we know right now today, we would have about $1 million left in our reserve if we spent it all. And things are more expensive today than they were when we first did that capital outlay. So it's not like we do have significant funds, it looks like, but not if we expend against all those capital outlays. So,
Don't let it burn a hole in your pocket.
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I know there was a meeting scheduled for how we were going to use that money or spend that money, but we never did have the meeting.
Well, that's because we ended up spending it all on the salaries in 2022, because
Yeah.
it was better administratively to do it that way.
It was easier and cleaner for us, record keeping too.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, if I may, Mayor. On the zoning that we have for single-family residential and for two-family residential. We only have one district for each. I've been a critic of that since it was created way back in 2010 or 9 or whenever. The city incorporated in '07, and I've lived here since '05, so I've seen all the process go. And I've been a critic of the single zoning district for residential, single-family, and for duplex, thinking that we do have really some differentials in our existing platted land areas for single-family and probably for duplex. I'm not as familiar with that and where it's located in the city, and have not focused on that because single-family is really the dominant thing that we have. I think that deserves an additional review, especially for the future, because we have lots of vacant land that is developable into single-family or two-family in the future, and I think we need to make sure that we can address properly different types of housing styles to address the future growth in the city for that vacant land.
Okay.
So that would be a concern that I have. The other side of that is that, what's my other point?
Larry, if I could, while you're we are very limited in what we can do in residential design standards. In fact, we can't impose residential design standards. I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
No, what I'm talking about is we only have one classification. So.
Oh, well, you're talking about of different, like, say, sizes of homes.
Right.
Not necessarily look, architectural look. Okay.
All sorts of things, yeah.
The state's pretty stingy about what you can do with regard to architectural style.
Yeah.
For residential.
No, it's not about the style, but it's about.
Distribution of use and density.
The land area itself for the property.
Okay.
So I think we have some distinct differences in what we've operated. The other thing I would ask of you, if we could have a PDF handout for our packet for the council meeting.
Of the presentation?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I have some other questions for you, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but we have a plat for approval today, and there are a couple of things in there that give me raise for concern, and I would like to bounce those off of you for an opinion.
Yeah. Let's not make her opine on matters that are outside of.
All right, we'll ask you separately.
They're going to politely decline to make a comment on that.
We haven't hired her yet.
That's right.
Well, that's true.
So the question really is to get any questions answered about the contract with her organization.
Yeah.
That would, she's here.
And right now, I think it looks good to me. I think it's well scoped out, and thanks to Taylor.
Next. Questions?
Thank you so much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah. The next item is J, approving the final plat of the Trail Ridge subdivision and accepting public rights of way dedicated therein. Is there any questions or comments on that? Did you want to say something?
Was Taylor going to say something? No?
I can.
No, I just have one thing. So this is one of the first things I voted on when I was first elected city council. That was a plat for subdivision over
In East Lincolnshire?
on Dogwood.
Planned zoning district,
Oh, in Dogwood,
the
yeah.
PZD
The
that
plat,
came
the
through.
final plat.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is, does it meet the minimum requirements that were established for a plat?
This final plat has met all requirements.
That's
And
kind of
so
it, right?
that's it. Thank you for remembering that. So whenever they've met all of our requirements in code to subdivide, you really don't have any legal or constitutional way to turn it down. It's not a matter of we like it or we like them or we don't like it or we don't like them. It's not, and no one believes that anyway. But that's arbitrary and capricious. That's something we can't do. And so if the city's concerned about how this has been developed and drawn up and dealt with, the answer to that is you're going to have to look at your code and your requirements for the next one. You're not going to be able to decline this one because they've met requirements.
So, and then the second question, I saw there was an issue with
The culvert material?
Yeah, has that been resolved, or what did the planning commission took up that conversation and?
Yeah, essentially a waiver was sought to use HDPP instead of reinforced concrete under this public right-of-way, and there was no issue with the drainage analysis. Our engineer had no issues with it, and the planning commission approved the waiver, so they are good to go to use the HDPP that is there.
And so how did that happen? I mean, that doesn't just happen overnight and because somebody didn't read the plans. Construction errors like that are not of a common area, especially when the plans are approved. They do say reinforced concrete pipe.
I would have to defer to the applicant because I was not out in the field when that was made.
I'll say it's an attractive subdivision. I've driven in it like probably 3 different times now, and it is on sewer as well.
It is sewer.
So that's a bonus. Yeah.
Utilities are in, water and sewer is there, streets are in, street signs are in, stop signs are in. It's ready to go.
A couple of questions for you. I have a number of questions about the packet. One is the statement of values is in there, but is it in a form and breakdown that meets the utility requirements for wastewater, for water, and for the city relative to the street values? In other words, do we need the values broken down differently for accounting purposes, and that should come from the developer to do that, because they're the ones that have the data and the information for it. And I'm wondering if they meet those accounting requirements for the POA Water Department, for village wastewater, for the water and sewer, and then for us, the city code, in terms of how we account for valuations on our streets.
So our code didn't have much to offer on that. That is why we have the estimates that we have. However, all entities reviewed it, but it was a good learning curve for next time, or especially if we enter into this contract, something we need to put in our subdivision code to kind of line it out exactly what we want to see. But yeah, there is no step-by-step process lined out in code or anywhere else in the current practice because these are really rare. These don't happen very much in Bella Vista. But all entities did review it, the process that's in there. So, and our estimate, our engineer estimate that was given was similar to it. So they had no rebuttal against it, if that makes sense.
Okay. So the 3 entities, the street department, the water utility, and the wastewater utility have all approved the breakdowns that we've received so far.
Typically, the street department does not really get involved with preliminary plats, street construction. They're like more the maintenance side. However, yes, village wastewater, water department, and our engineer, our private engineer, our contract engineers reviewed it.
They're acceptable to them?
Yeah, they said it was similar to what they agreed to, or what they estimated.
The performance bond starts on July 1st, and we're first approving this to accept it on September 1st effectively, because our meeting is next week. I would really like to see that bond extended out to September 1st to 24. Performance bond.
Well, if it's meeting our code requirement, we can't just arbitrarily change that amount of time.
What do you mean it's meeting our code requirements? I don't know how our code requirements is written.
We have a 1-year maintenance
It's
bond.
one year, and I would assume it's from the date of approval or acceptance, and we haven't accepted it yet.
Well, it'll be filed with record on a certain date once it's approved. I have to go back and look at our code to see.
Well, if it's
Talking about a difference of
28,
weeks.
it'd be August 28th, but I'm suggesting a round number of September 1st, but we can be the exact date that it was
I can't answer
recorded.
that, so I sit here without, you know.
I would ask you to look at that to see whether that date needs to be extended. I think it should be in our interest and in the interest of the utilities that are owning them. Because it hasn't been accepted and it hasn't been recorded. And I don't know what the delays have been, but notwithstanding that delay, we have not and have not yet accepted those. So I would ask for that bond, performance bond, to be extended to whatever the recording date is or the approval date by this body.
They offer bond yet.
Yes, it was all part of the application process.
Okay, does it have a time?
1 year.
from the date of the bond to the date of the approval? Do you know what the bond says?
Not off the top of my head.
I don't either, so that's what we've got.
It's just dated July 1st and it goes to July 1st
A year
next
from the
year.
date of approval, it could say a year from the date of execution of bond, it could, I mean, we need to look at that.
It says currently the expiration is July 1st of '24. As I read the bond without reading the fine print.
Mean code.
I have to review the law, I don't know what everything off the top of my head, Larry, I'm sorry.
Did you say
I
June 22nd of 2023, is that what you said?
The bond, the performance bond says July 1st of
This is the
'23 to July
maintenance
1st of
bond.
'24.
What he's talking about?
Yeah.
Signed, sealed,
Yeah.
and dated this 22nd day of June 2023.
We need to see if that meets our requirements, it's been too long.
It's an application requirement, so we have to see it before we even accept the final plat.
So it may end up being longer than a year, but it has to be for 1 year, and we have to see it before we can even put it on the development calendar. So that will put it probably 42 days before, actually, honestly, probably about 50 days before it even comes to you guys, 60 days, almost 2 months. So I can see how that 2-month lag would happen.
They should have already complied, if it's a performance, I mean, they should have already complied before we accept the final plat, right?
Yes, and it's,
Oh, we have the bond. I'm only saying is that it's not a year after we've accepted it. It's a year after it was submitted
We can look at that.
for application.
Yeah.
Because the bond is dated based on the application date, I'm assuming.
Well, hopefully before the application.
Yeah.
We'll look into it.
Okay. Can you clarify the easement along the
Little drive entry.
little drive entry? Yeah, what that's all about?
That is granting a driveway easement to whoever buys that lot. So that way they have access through Cooper property or private property to access a public street.
So that's the one lot that's on that corner?
It's lot 38, the very
Yeah.
south side.
Okay, so that's for their driveway.
And so that way they're not accessing a major arterial, they have access to a residential,
Yeah,
low-traffic
okay.
street.
All right. Then I have some other questions. Number 35 and number 39. Okay. It's on the plat itself, and it's on sheet 2 of the plat. And when I look at this, I'm wondering where we sit in this thing. And the questions that I have relate to note 4 on sheet 2. Note 4 says, unless shown otherwise on the plat, all lots have a non-exclusive and a subordinate 7.5-foot utility and drainage easement reserved by the developer. So he's the one that has the subordinate approval and rights on the interior of all lots, such easements to be parallel with the corresponding lot line. And Counselor, could you interpret what that really means? So if we have a utility that wants to cross that 7.5-foot subordinate easement, who do they have to get approval from?
Well, they're gonna have to meet our requirements, but that's just, they have an easement right in there of their own, but it is subordinate to ours. So that doesn't mean they wouldn't have to comply with our requirement, though.
So do they have denial authority from something that we would say would be
I think
okay?
they can put something of their own interest in there as well. It doesn't give them a veto over what we would approve.
So it's not a controlling interest, it's an allowance
It's a
interest,
subordinate,
a permission interest.
a permission.
Permission interest. In other words, it allows them to do something in there, obviously subject to the city, but it allows them to do something in there
As
without
long as it
getting...
is subordinate to our rights and interests.
So there's not a denial authority in there?
No.
Okay. So they couldn't restrict another utility coming in and wanting to cross that 7.5 feet?
I don't know what they might claim. I don't think they would have that right.
Because I know they have that right in all of the rest of the city. All of the existing 320-plus plats that are out there, that 7.5 foot, if you want to cross that.
And we are making these public, that they are retaining an interest as well. And so they want, they're saying, yes, it's public now, city,
Yeah.
but we still want to be able to put what we need to put in there too. That's what they're retaining.
Okay, my question is, what, is there authority, a restriction authority to someone using it? Is it a restrictive authority? In other words, do you have to get permission?
It gives them the right to put what they want and have their use in that easement as well. When you say prohibit, they would, anything that else, it's for the public, so we could allow.
Well, if we have a new utility come into town, and I'm not
Natural
sure.
gas now.
Well, okay, natural gas, we don't have any. So if that came into town,
It would be a public easement, we could allow that to be put in there, but they would also have a secondary subsidiary right to it. They couldn't make us move our lines in that easement to do what they wanted to do. They would have to accommodate us.
So if we want, if a gas company came in to do that, do they have denial permission in that easement because they have subordinate rights?
What is a denial permission? That's what I'm not.
Not allowed.
Can I ask a question? Is the language that he's talking about, is this typical language in any plat?
It's typical of everything.
Of every single thing? Okay, so I mean.
But historically, it was historic and.
I mean,
And that was before.
We could debate these points all night, and you keep asking these kind of rhetorical things that he doesn't have the information to your question. I mean,
Well, I guess here's the long and short of it. If you take any of the existing 320-some subdivision plats that are here, that 7.5 foot, if you want to have some other third utility that hasn't been approved by the developer, by Cooper, to be installed.
I don't think they deny that, Larry. It's public easement, so we are allowed to have people.
Okay, and I'm just wondering if we're continuing that restrictive situation, because Cooper granted authority to the electric company and to the telephone company and a few others to use those easements, the water department, the sewer department, to cross over those easements. That's a carte blanche approval that they've given, as I understand. And so those utilities can do that. But if we had a new utility come to town, they would have to get approval on every one of those lots unless a general approval were granted. Okay? On the existing, this is a new plat now, so are we dealing with the same standard? Is my
So
question.
can I ask, so would this question have any impact on whether they met the minimum requirements that they have met in order, they met the minimum requirements, so does this question have anything to do with whether we approve or disapprove the
So my question is,
plat? I mean, or is this just a question you want answered?
My question is it a superfluous requirement that we should not be continuing to permit? It's already there on the 320-some that was there when we incorporated. We can't change any of that.
If you want to talk about the policy of it, you have to look at that in the future. I think what has been said is that they've met the current requirements. And I do know that what we've got in smaller type developments has been a typical compromise, if you will, that we reached with Cooper Communities regarding the issue.
I think maybe the question is if, on a new development, can we restrict or deny that 7.5 foot easement, or is that?
On a new development, could we, the city can determine subdivision requirements.
And it's going to set up as a public easement, but with a subordinate overlay to the developer on that same area. Well, getting hung up on that, let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and if you don't like it, you can always vote no.
Well, I like the subdivision. Number 9, item 9. Item 9 says, is that the one? It says number 9. Oh, it talks about because it's on sewer, every property has to put in their own grinder system. My question is, it doesn't address the pipe from the grinder pump to where the connection of the existing sewer is. In other words, there's probably a T or a Y or a connection point, and maybe there's not. Maybe that will be made. But I'm assuming that it says clearly here in number 7 that, or number 9, that pump station is the responsibility of the property owner. Okay. But it doesn't say the pipe from that pump station up to the connection with the sewer is his too. So who does that belong to? And so my question is, it's not addressed here, so it's an unknown in terms of this plat. So if I, as a private property owner, were to buy a lot here, it doesn't tell me that that I have to responsibility for that pipe from the grinder pump to the connection. And I'm thinking that's normally,
You may have to pay for it.
normally that's an owner responsibility up to the connection point.
Which, again, the applicant's here tonight, but yeah, so essentially, Village Wastewater and the developer, or actually at the request of Village Wastewater, this development will probably, will be handled like it is everywhere else. The contractor or the single-family home developer will be responsible for putting in the sewer tap, just like now. And again, she's here, and she can kind of allude to those discussions probably a little bit more in detail. But yes, that was reviewed, that was extensively reviewed through this, and agreed with Village Wastewater through this development, what the sewer development process would look like for these R1 lots.
So I'm assuming that the connection from the pump station to the sewer is the private owner's responsibility. I'm wondering if it should be said here in the plat somewhere.
I believe it's just like every other sewer department. When you build a house, I don't think it says on the plat that you're responsible for the sewer line. We just address the grinder pump so that people would understand that that was their
That's the big
deal.
cost.
Let me reemphasize, we can't, I mean, Larry, we're saying, wouldn't it be a good idea if you added this and you did that and you did the other thing? If our code requires it, then we have to make sure it does that before we bring that to you. If it doesn't require it, it's not something we could make them do.
Well, it's not even in the city. It would be the wastewater utility that.
But we're talking about approving a final plat for the city, so, I mean, there's limited scope of what we can do.
It's met all the minimum requirements.
The staff is saying that. I have not independently reviewed that, but the staff has independently reviewed that.
I mean,
And
that's,
the last one is I'm trying to figure out what the intent is of note number 10. It's a perpetual blanket easement, privilege and right in upon, over and across the common properties, glasses on. Common properties reflected hereon, if any, for the purpose of constructing and maintaining such roads, streets, and highways. Shall be, and it shall determine to be necessary for the grading, leveling, filling, draining, paving, bridges, culverts, and any or all installation or desirable of such roads, highways, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that's the highway right-of-way dedication. They're talking about a perpetual blanket easement. The developer, its successors, and assigns reserve a perpetual blanket easement in the road right-of-way.
What page are you looking at?
I'm looking at sheet 2 on the left-hand side, item number 10. And it's
On page 141 of 181.
141, correct. It's a carte blanche perpetual blanket easement on all the road right-of-way, as far as I can tell.
That is language that's in all plats in Bella Vista. I can tell you that. Those other plats do predate the existence of the city, but they don't predate the existence of the county. So all I can tell you is that it reads as it's presented. And I don't know that that is in there to meet one of our requirements, or if it's one of their desires in terms of how they want to build their development. I don't think it's in there because we demanded it. I think it's in there.
I know it's not in there because we asked for it. I'm just questioning whether it needs to be in there.
Well, that's their business. I mean, it's not our requirement.
But is it our business that it's there?
That's up to y'all to determine, I guess, but if it's in the, Taylor, is it in the code?
No, it's not in the code, it's not a
It's
plan
not a
requirement.
requirement. It's not a requirement. So my question is it something that, should continue?
Can't speak to that in terms of this development, but if that's something that you want to look at in the future, it's certainly a topic that is probably worthy of some discussion if there's.
I think it's a topic for our quota evaluation. So, okay. That's it.
You said that was the last one, you're done.
I'm done. You ran me out of gas.
Okay, why don't we move on to K then? Authorizing the mayor and city clerk to enter into a Sixth Amendment to the limited terminable license agreement, trail system license with Bella Vista Village POA for the purpose of adding parcels for expansion of the public trail system. POA passed this, I believe, in July, and it's 7 additions to the trails. Some of them are to back 40, and some of them are to Little Sugar. Most of them are making smaller loops, shorter loops, and several of them are characterized as beginner loops. They're not all, but several of them are. And I don't know if anybody has discussion on it. I have taken note that Trailblazers is, I think they make a big effort to respond to what people want and what they're interested in. And this, in my view, this is responsive to what they are aware of that people want in the trails. So they have some simpler trails and some shorter trails in particular. Some of them are connectors and whatnot. So.
Are these the ones that was written up in the paper that the POA board just approved?
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, Jason, can you just explain like the licensing process? I mean, what we're doing as a city when we do that?
As you all know, that Bella Vista is a private development. And just because there's a city doesn't mean we can just allow the public to enter on private property and use it for recreational purposes. So in order to get around that hurdle, as well as to avail ourselves of the development of the trail system from private sources, which donated significant money, upon condition that it would have to be open to the public, we entered into agreements with the POA. We also entered into agreements with Cooper over certain smaller parcels, but mainly with the POA, to allow public use of the trails on the plats that are indicated in the license agreement. A license is a permission to use property. It's something less than an easement, but it allows the public to go on and use their real property for purposes of trail recreation. And the POA agreed to do that initially. This would be the 6th proposed amendment, and we do an amendment every time we seek to add trail to the system. And we cannot, one of the important parts for us is we expend public tax dollars for the maintenance of these trails. We cannot expend public tax dollars for the improvement of private property. And so it is only for the facilitation of public use that we are allowed to spend tax dollars on this at all. And so it is very important for all those reasons that we go through this licensing agreement so that we guarantee the public's right to access the trail. And so that the private owner could just say, stay off, it's my property. We can't have that, particularly with taxpayer expenditure on it. So this is the 6th time we've done it.
Yep. There you go.
Very good. Any more questions about it? Okay, great. Next one is a resolution L, amending the 2023 budget to appropriate $60,000 in police impact fees to the police department for procurement attributable to the impact of new development. Chief, you want to give a short explanation?
Sure. So as we're near the end of the completion, excuse me, of the building, during the building process, there were a lot of change orders that impacted the bond. Okay. It was decided that when that happened between me and the previous mayor that we'd hopefully be able to make up some of those expenses near the end with the savings within the bond. When I look at the retainage that's still outstanding that's going to impact the bond, okay, as well as some of the IT stuff that's not done, this room and the room across the hallway. When I look at what I believe will be remaining in the bond, when it's all said and done, it'll probably be less than $10,000 that's not spoken for, okay? So these three things I've identified here are just completing some of the existing work that's already going on within the building, okay? And it's only because the bond probably won't have the money in it to do this without this additional funds, without these additional money being allocated. Questions?
Where's the detention pond?
I'm sorry?
Where's
behind us, behind the building.
Jason, you reviewed this, and this is proper use of impact funds, because it's...
I inquired about that question. So you can use impact fees for items which are attributable to the impact of new development to provide additional capacity. That's what you can use the impact fees for. There is an element of this building that is bigger because we have additional capacity because of new development. It is only that justifies the use.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, the end of this, at least the whole second half of this building, maybe more, ended up being a very inflationary period, which I don't think was fully anticipated. And we were very fortunate that we were able to complete the building within the confines of the bond, and we just had this little tiny amount go over. I think we were fortunate we came out as well as we did, given especially in the construction industry, some of the cost increases. Fortunately, we had a lot of things nailed down, and so I feel good about the fact we didn't didn't go over by very much. So.
Just so you know, as far as impact fees on the PD side, I checked with Kim, with our finance. At the end of 2022, on the PD side, there was about $195,000 available in our impact fees, and so we're clearly further into 2023. So there's plenty of money as far as the impact fees are concerned.
Yeah, Kim was very favorable to using that, because of that rule that you have to spend it in 7 years. And I think one of the prior communities she was with, they kind of sat around, didn't think about the impact fees, and all of a sudden 6 years, holy mackerel, we haven't spent anything. Tried to scramble around and find something, it can be. So you do have to kind of think about it. So, thank you. Okay, item M is establishing salaries for mayor, city council member, and city clerk to begin January 1, 2024. And I have several attachments explaining and justifying it. So basically, what we're doing is increasing the city clerk 10% and city council 10%, and increasing the mayor 10%. And this was all from the January 1, 22 period, because that's the last time mayor and city council had an increase, except that the city clerk did get a 5% increase beginning in 23. However, it's hard to get comps for city clerk, and that's why I noted that Siloam Springs, which is only about 18,000 people, has a full-time city clerk who pays $66,000. Of course, there's benefits and everything with that. So I feel like we're getting a really good value on our city clerk, frankly, being part-time. And of course, for whatever reason, the workload has been just amazing. Last year we had something like 22 ordinances, and this year I think we're on 48 or something already, and we're nowhere near the end of the year. So I felt the 10%. And the other justification, I know some folks on council are always worried about the employees, and the employees really have been 10% plus in the last couple of years. So I outlined that. That said some things about the different, some things about the city clerk and city council. The 5-city average is 12,900, and of course Bentonville recently had a 40% raise. And on the mayor's side, I put in salary and medical to show the contrast. We also have I actually misstated last time I said there are 6 subordinates making more than the mayor, and we forgot one. There was actually 7, but a number of them are making a lot more. So I just took an average at the top 5, and it was 142,000 or so. So I showed the average of the other mayors, and the reason I mentioned Siloam Springs in particular is because, as I say, they're smaller than we are, and they're making quite a bit more. And so anyway, I just put some stats in there to try to show where we're coming from. But in the past, I've found city councils always reluctant to say anything or to name a number, so I thought I'm just going to get out there and name one, and I think that price is very justified, frankly. The 10% increase is, I think, pretty modest. And Jim?
I got a problem with how much you put in for city council, but I guess what I would really like to do, the mayor and the city clerk, run them through as one resolution, and then run the city council through as a separate one, because I got a real problem with the 10%. So basically break this up and make 2 ordinances, one with the clerk and the employees, and then another ordinance just for city council.
Well, you can go through an amendment process. If you want to, you like one of them, but you don't like the other 2 or whatever it is, you can move to amend and change those numbers in the context of this one resolution. Or have a separate consideration of that, but then it would all come back to one at the end. We can do 2, we can do 3 for each one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will bring it up then, and then we'll see what happens, but, like I said, I don't have a problem with the other 2, I just have a problem with the other.
Suggestion would be is to do 3 ordinances.
Well, they're resolutions, but
Yeah.
I do understand, because you may end up with a final result where you like 2 of them, but not that other one. And in order to vote it, you'd have to vote it all down or vote it all up, so.
I'll ask for an amendment to adjust what I think is different for the council, and if it flies, it flies, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Do we need a full-time city clerk? Is there a need for a full-time?
Well, right now, it's a part-time position. It's an elected position, and so I guess that's done by ordinances. And I personally, it's a funny situation. I personally like the part-time concept, and you get a different group of people, whether it's part-time or full-time. And you might get a better group if it's part-time. I point to the last 2 city clerks we've had, the present one and the prior one. I don't have knowledge prior to that. Well, I know Jane Wilms, but, I was...
She did a bang-up job.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought she did I thought she did a lot of different things. So, but anyway, my viewpoint is sometimes part-time you might get better quality people, actually, because you get somebody, who's maybe near retirement, wants to do other things, but wants to work some too. And the last couple of people appeared to me, we got pretty good quality, but that's just my opinion.
Does the workload justify full-time clerk? I mean, not necessarily based on the qualification of who it might be, but does the workload justify full-time?
Yeah, well, I think it appears to me it can be done in 20 hours a week, but maybe Wanda would know better than I would.
At this point, I think it's written up that it can be up to 22 hours a week, and it's work. If it gets to be very much more, it'll be more than that, but right now it's working.
We don't have a wastewater department, we don't have a water department, we don't have a parks department. That all adds additional duties in the clerk's area.
Right. And this is mostly,
Ordinances, everything.
right. This clerk position is very different from some cities where they're doing also their clerk, recorder, treasurer. And that would be a full-time job, but this position doesn't have any treasurer.
But that's a good question, Jerry. And it'll continue to be a question, I think, in the future. Maybe we may want to revisit that at some point, so. Well, let's see. We have one more item, and it's a discussion item, consideration of requiring a subcontractor or other over-the-counter permit for septic system repair in city limits. And that's Planning Manager Robertson. This is like being the last speaker of the day at a seminar, or maybe right before lunch.
I know, everyone laughed. No one wants to hear this. This was really just kind of like a last minute topic that I and the mayor had very briefly, but it's kind of been on my mind since the septic discussion last year, because I don't know if you remember, if you were a part of like the STR whole discussion, a lot of it came about septic data and the lack of it. We don't have any data in-house, how much like tanks need replaced or how much leach fields need repaired, any lines need repaired. We don't have any data like that at all because currently we don't oversee it. However, we do oversee plumbing repairs, so if a plumber needs to replace like a leak of a line in the yard, or they gotta alter it, or have to put in a new one, so like all the new builds need to get one, they have to pull a permit from us. It's over the counter, or it's almost instantaneous online if they choose to do our portal option. It's just basically make sure you're licensed, where's it at, that's it. Like it's very super easy and quick. We've already issued, I think, 428 of them this year. It's a really common permit. However, licensed septic professionals don't have to get any permit at all from us. So it's led to this lack of knowledge, knowing how many of the 78% of our housing units with leach systems have been repaired or need to be repaired, et cetera. But that's really the discussion point, kind of seeing if there's any interest in city council to start over-the-counter permitting septic repair, as we do with plumbing.
I think it's needed. I think it's necessary. That's the only way we can ever make any kind of determination as to what our septic systems might be, what the situation might be with it. We have no idea how many's been replaced, repaired, or anything else.
I don't know if there's any reporting. Is there any reporting required that you know of or are aware of if they replace a tank? The steel tank gets replaced with a new tank?
No, I don't even think off the top of my head they need a permit from ADH to do that. They typically only get involved when the leach field needs worked on. So tanks can be replaced by licensed professionals without
any notification to anyone?
Yeah,
so.
or a permit, yeah, from either entity.
Right. You mentioned 400 and some permits being issued?
428.
For?
Plumbing work.
Outside plumbing?
There's only a couple types that we have that we like permit. Typically irrigation, minor repairs, alterations, new systems. Those are the most common types of plumbing permits we issue. So like if a line needs repaired, or they need to put in a whole new plumbing, they need to replace.
So if they need to put in a new pumping tank, a grinder pumping tank or grinder pump, do they need to permit for that?
Off the top of my head, I do not know. I would hate to give you the wrong answer up front on the record, but I can look into that.
So if the pipe leaks between the house and the tank, which is gravity fed, and they repair that, is that a plumbing repair? Do they need to get a permit?
The tank, like a septic tank?
No, the grinder pump.
Okay.
Yeah, he's talking about the sewer.
Yeah.
So it'd be connected to the sewer, or a septic tank if it needs repair between the building and the tank. Whether it's a grinder pit or whether it's a septic tank, does that need a permit?
And typically if septic is mentioned, we say no permit required.
Because I'm assuming they pull a plumbing permit to run the pipe from the building to the tank. I assume that's a part of the permit.
I believe that is correct, but I would need to confirm.
Yeah, I don't believe they're coming in and pulling permits.
Oh, septic is not, but you don't think sewer is either? He's asking about sewer.
I think so.
Is sewer.
Well, it's between the building and the device. So the device would be a septic tank as in one situation, and it would be a grinder pump in another one, and then do they get a permit for the line from the grinder pump up to the connection in the street to the sewer?
Typically, any repair will need a permit if it's plumbing. If it's a licensed plumber coming in to make a repair, like a leaking yard, like a return line, a hard line, or whatever you call it in the yard, they will need to pull a permit and we'll put it in there as a repair. But if it's a septic system that, you know, a licensed installer, DR, whatever it be, is going in to repair it, once they say septic, we will say no permit needed.
So if we change this rule like you're suggesting, then they need a permit to, if we pass an ordinance that needed a permit to repair the septic, and then we'd have be able to keep a list of what the repairs were, and
I would be able to
have
pull
some idea.
Yeah, I would be able to pull data on septic specifically like I did with plumbing today. All the addresses, what was done to it. Right now, we don't have anything like that for septic. That's the intent of the discussion tonight, if you guys are, you know, if there's a political interest to have that data.
So you classify the different pieces that would be in there for the septic system, and if we don't do it for the grinder pumps and that kind of thing, I would think that we would want to start doing that as well for the connections into the sewer for any plumbing rework that's done over time.
Essentially, any plumbing, whether it deals with sewer or septic, would be permitted, would be the overall goal, not
So
just sewer.
in your list of 458 or whatever, some of those are relative to connections to the public sewer system?
New lines, yes. New lines, replacements of existing, alterations of existing. Forget what the last one is. Oh, water line repair, even that, yeah. But yes, this should involve all plumbing. A licensed plumber must do all plumbing work within our city limits in Chapter 103. I will say, I'm not sure where an ordinance like this would go. I'm not sure if it would fit into Chapter 103, right under the plumbing or before the plumbing. Staff has not looked at this in detail at all.
We'll find a place for it. Don't worry about it. We'll find, if we want to do it, we can find a place for it. We already have some regulations about water connections to failing septic systems and whatnot. There's probably a place in that chapter or in that article that we could squeeze something in. We'll figure it out.
Are we able to bring that forward for our meeting next week?
I would ask, I haven't even written it, we're just.
No, that would
we
be
just
too
thought about it,
fast.
so.
Yeah, I think though, I was gonna say, go ahead and put something together, and maybe next month,
We can do it for
we
next month.
consider it. Yeah, because I've sensed there's an appetite for it.
About a year ago, I introduced an ordinance that required a permit for basically the same thing. Then I pulled it because of objections to it. But since I saw this, I have talked to the a couple of the sewer, or not sewer, but septic service companies, especially B&B. They have no objection to it if they can do the permit online. Somebody doesn't have to come to the office and do a in-person permit.
So when you said I recall you bringing this general subject up. When you said there was objections, it was by the septic people, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's just being another piece of paper and another
Trip to the...
yeah, another trip to the office to get a permit.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you brought something. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but I knew it was on this subject. So, well, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Unless anybody has something else, I think that's it. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Even if I did, I wouldn't say it. Who's in charge of the food truck next week?
The food truck?
Well,